Hello, we'll start by talking about language assertiveness or linguistic assertiveness and saying that there are two different ways, two different approaches to promote a language, generally to renormalize a language which has previously been abnormalized. One is top down and it comes from governments, institutions, and it works by enforcing laws, norms, etc. And the other one is the bottom up one, which comes basically from speakers and can express itself through behavior and attitudes as well. That's the one we will focus on because our target are minoritized language speakers. And then we'll focus on the behavior and what they can do to increase the frequency with which they speak their own language. Many minoritized language speakers are silent speakers, which means they don't tend to show their language in a variety of social situations. They tend to use the dominant language and in some cases even to hide the fact that they are speakers of a different language. If we pay attention to the different behaviors of those speakers, we can say that many of them are directly submissive. So whenever they don't know their partner in a conversation, they will use dominant language, DL. Others behave in a way that we could name as reactive, meaning they might try to use their language at the beginning, but whenever they are answered back in dominant language, they immediately switch. And then we've got resilient speakers, which are the ones that tend to use the languages and even resist switching into dominant language. That one is not a very frequent behavior among minoritized language speakers, and of course it depends on the language. It's easier to find this behavior in languages with a high intercomprehensibility with the dominant language, for example. What happens with that is that we've got quite tiny linguistic spaces, and especially, which is even more important, is that they are fractionated, so there is not overlapping between our linguistic spaces. So traditionally, it has been considered that from a position of linguistic defection, so renouncing to use your own language, what you need to move into a position of linguistic loyalty, which would be being willing to use your language. You need some kind of awareness. You need to become conscious that your language is in a difficult situation, and also that there is something you can do to change that, and this something is basically speaking your own language. But when people are already in a position of linguistic loyalty, meaning they are willing to speak the language, what they need to move into a position of actually speaking the language is resources. So resources are the bridge that will allow people who already have reached a level of awareness, they are conscious about their own language, to show a behavior consisting in actually speaking the language. So these resources have to be learned because the dominant languages don't need those resources. So dominant language speakers don't need to learn these resources, but we, minoritized language speakers, we do need these resources and we do need to learn them. So basically the resources are learning how to change what we say to ourselves, so what we think and what we tell ourselves in the moment in which we have to decide which language we will use, what to say to others and also how to say it, and very importantly, how we feel. We've got to learn to modulate the way we feel about that, because if we feel uncomfortable using the language, we won't do it for a long time. So linguistic assertiveness is basically the idea of using more our ML with three different characteristics: respecting the others, meaning not threatening or coactioning or manipulating others, but also feeling comfortable, which means as well that we don't allow for ourselves to be manipulated. So how hard is to be assertive? This is quite a clear diagram. You can see here that on the submissive pole, meaning non-assertive or passive, you're not being honest because you're not doing what you're willing to do. You are being appropriate, seen from the other's point of view, and respectful, but you're not being direct. While on the other side, on the opposite side, the aggressive one, you might be being honest, but you're not being appropriate or respectful, and you might be being direct, even too excessively direct. So the assertive position would be to be honest and appropriate and respectful, but also direct. That's the main idea of assertiveness, not just in language terms, but generally. So the idea is, if we are assertive and we start using our own language more, then we'll get linguistic spaces that will overlap with each other and will allow for the language to flourish. I mean, that would really be a linguistic space, because a linguistic space cannot be individual by definition. What we need is spaces in which we feel comfortable using our own language, independently of the fact that we previously know that we are in front of a minoritized language speaker. So even when we don't know which language do our partners speak, we feel comfortable to use our own language to open up a conversation, for example. And that's all for lesson 1. Thank you for your attention.